third request for this month is a bit of a stretch. It's a video game review on a really good game, but... yeah, it's not what you would call animal-themed. It has nature themes to it, and the main character makes allusions to it all the damn time.
If anything threatens their home, they'll risk their lives to defend it. People are animals too.
And they have a mascot that's a winged pig.
Way to go, Hans. First day on the job and you're already a hero.
Our success today was thanks to the animals living in these woods.
But yeah, unlike Danganronpa or Assassination Classroom, I wouldn't say that's enough to fit the qualifications for these requests. Though I have done plenty of non-animal themed media on occasion, like with Final Fantasy XV that I'm doing again soon. And since Arthur has been a longtime supporter, I'm willing to let this one through this one time. Don't expect me to do it every time though, so keep that in mind. Anyway, let's talk about the awesome that is Valkyria Chronicles. The game comes to us by Sega and their own team, originally known as Sega WoW, whose staff originally worked on the Sakura Wars series. This includes director Shintaro Tanaka and producer Ryutaro Nonaka. They wanted to make a game that combines the gameplay and story elements of like Sakura Wars, Nightshade, and Skies of Arcadia, which resulted in what we will be seeing shortly. It came out 2008 on the PS3 before receiving a PC port in 2014, and a remastered PS4 version in 2016, which is the version I was told to look at. Incidentally, this game is also coming to Nintendo Switch, but we'll talk more on that and the other games toward the end. For now, let's really get into what makes this one of the most memorable strategy JRPGs of our time. First, let's talk about the plot. In the fictional world of Europa, 1935, the East European Imperial Alliance declares war on the Atlantic Federation for their abundant source of a powerful mineral called Ragnite, causing the Second European War. While the Federation plays defense, the Alliance decides to try and invade the neutral nation of Gallia to get their Ragnite resources. At this point, people from the village of Brule are forced to migrate toward the capital, while we also get acquainted with our lead character, Welkin Gunther, who likes nothing more than to sketch pictures of various wildlife, even if it gets him mistaken for a potential spy by the town watch and its leader, Alicia. Despite not believing him at first, he gets cleared after meeting with his adopted sister, Sarah, who together live in the house of Welkin's father, Belgin. Wait, that would mean Welkin's a resident of this town, as is Alicia. And while they do say later she was from an orphanage, you mean to tell me they never met each other as kids or something? The peaceful serenity of the town is cut short when the Imperial army start attacking. First by killing innocent travelers, and then attacking the town itself. Despite their best efforts, they're outclassed and they have to flee. Welkin decides to return home to save his sister and nanny, and takes control over their father's old tank, the Edelweiss.
All right, Edelweiss, move out!
AKA the most invincible tank in the world! They managed to hold off the Imperials long enough for the townsfolk to escape, and with only the nanny's newborn child as a memento of this day. They vow to one day return to the town once they push the Imperials out of Gallia. As per the customs of their nation, they are drafted into the military, with Welkin as a lieutenant and Alicia as a sergeant. Together, they lead Squad 7 as they go on dangerous missions to take on the Imperials in whatever way they can, overcoming many obstacles and hardships in the process. Now, the character design and models are like with a lot of PS3-based JRPGs or other anime-inspired games, but it's the presentation of everything that makes it stand out. The games run under the Canvas engine, which allows the 3D graphics to come off as something you see from a watercolor painting, or as they say, an artist's sketchbook. You can tell from how the shading looks on characters and the washed out colors along the edges of the screen, and during certain scene transitions during gameplay. Because of the kind of setting and themes they went with, in addition to the kind of game engine they chose to present everything in, everything is designed in a way that would be a fair compromise to being close to reality while still focusing heavily on story and characters. The voice acting is also really good as far as the English dub goes. I don't often look at the Japanese version of games, so I don't know how some sound compared to here. But not once did I really have a problem with anyone's performances, as they just felt natural to the characters they play.
Hold on to these for me, will you?
Sure, Welkin. What are these? Some kind of nuts?
No. Actually, they're long-beard goat droppings.
Ah! Gross! You made me hold poo? Are you crazy?
Now going into actual gameplay, for starters, each chapter is divided into episodes. While looking at the main menu, you can select an episode to play and you'll either get a cinematic cutscene, a cutscene with dialogue boxes you press buttons for, but still have character models interacting with each other, or, of course, a battle map. Each chapter has at least one battle map, which you can only complete once. At least until you beat the game, and then you can replay them whenever you want. Battles are conducted on a similar basis as other strategy games, where both sides take turns in moving units around the map and performing one action at a time, depending on the number of command points the player or CPU has. In this case, following the Blitz system, whenever you select a unit, you zoom onto the map and control them in real time. Then, depending on where you are, the enemy may start to attack you in self-defense, until you, of course, try and make an attack yourself. At that point, you would be able to aim, which takes getting used to, but luckily you can adjust your aim both with the control stick and control pad. Obviously, the goal is to try and kill the enemy soldiers that get in your way and occupy their base camp, but you only have so many action points, which take the form of a stamina bar, to move, and with each action that unit makes, the bar decreases a bit instead of refilling all the way. This is so you don't reuse the same unit the whole time like in other games. For while you can actually clear maps with one unit, the game encourages you to try using other units to try and make progress. It gets you to really think about what it is you should do, especially since, like with XCOM and the like, you have a chance of missing, which is only possible with how the target reticle is per weapon. Also, the enemy can fire back at you when you attack, which is the same for you during their turn. Whenever you kill an enemy, you can tap their body to remove them from the game. This is because of another mechanic that you yourself have, where if one of your guys gets defeated, you can walk up to them to have a medic rush in and save them, allowing you to recall them onto the map again from any base you control during the next turn. They, of course, can do the same thing, but that only really happens if their AI tells them to do it. More often than not, they will end their turn after shooting you, but if they touch your body, you're gone for good. Like Fire Emblem, this game does have permadeath, but here it's more forgiving because of the fact you can save people before they die for good, as you have a few turns to do so. That is, unless of course it's Welkin who gets killed, or anyone listed in the defeat conditions for the mission, in which case you would have to either start the mission over or return to the main menu. You can save during these missions, but in order to back out, you would definitely need to die and go back that way, so keep in mind what you're doing so you don't end up wasting too much time. There's more to combat that I'll brush up upon later, but I should probably go over the actual units and how it fits with everything else. Well, that's what the Headquarters tab is for. Here you have a few options, with more unlocked the further you get into the game, with the first notable one being the Command Room. This is where you can build up your squad using units that are readily available to you from a random selection. with more added over time until eventually everyone in the game is available. They come in different types. Scout, who have the most mobility and decent firepower, despite what Varg may say, since they can get some headshots pretty easily from a fair range. Then you have the Shock Trooper, who have high rapid attack power and defense, so they can even take on enemies without needing to do headshots. Lancers are essentially your tank busters. They have poor accuracy, but have good explosive power, and can even one-shot a tank if they hit a Ragnite engine that are on the back of the tanks. I guess Ragnite is something you need to have outside so it doesn't cause problems with the driver, but it just seems like an obvious weak spot. Next are Engineers, who are similar to Scouts in terms of mobility, but mostly exist to refill a unit's ammo or special weapon just by touching them. They can also disarm large mines so that your tanks can get by without taking damage, which they can also repair, even though that takes up their action just as it is to attack or self-heal. Lastly are the Snipers, probably the most powerful anti-personnel unit in the game because of their ability to headshot enemies from a long distance. Of course, until they get higher in level, and with better weapons and skills, they still have a chance of missing. But once you get a unit with a tiny reticle and range that makes it near impossible to miss, you're on top of the world. Which is why there are only ever 5 snipers in the entire game. And the best one is Marina, because she is an adorable loner. Each unit has their own set of potentials, which can be good or bad depending on the situation. They can range from skills that increase your stats if you're fighting in a certain environment, standing next to a certain individual, or it can even trigger when being attacked by enemies. Or they can decrease your stats if it's something they don't like. The worst being allergies, which drain your health the longer you're around what it is you're allergic to. Some units have personal potential skills which come from leveling up your class enough to unlock them. Some characters, as they are, even get skills from other sources. Either way, there's tons of possibilities to consider, and you will definitely jump back here often to see what you might get, especially if they happen to be cameos from other games, like the Skies of Arcadia characters. They're here. After that though, you have the Squad Barracks, where you can customize each unit with whatever unique weapon you obtain from killing named enemy units, also known as enemy aces, who often have higher defense, power, or sometimes evasion, so it's harder to kill them. But you get a nice weapon that often outmatches the ones you steadily get over time. Otherwise, you can outfit the units to have the same weapon they use, or mix and match with others within the same type. In the way of leveling them, that's where the training field comes in. Using the experience points you get from winning battles, you spend them on any particular class, and once filled all the way, everyone associated with that class will level up. It doesn't matter who it is or when they join, they will all be the same level as each other and get the same benefits of getting new potential unlocks and even get you new orders for Welkin to use. More on that later. At level 11, a class will be promoted to Elite, which results in better stats, but for like the Scouts and Shock Troopers, they get another sub-weapon to use. Yeah, I forgot to mention, some classes have grenades they can throw at enemies, but Scouts get a grenade launcher they attach to their rifles, and Shock Troopers get flamethrowers. Then there's their research and development facility, where you spend money to upgrade weapons and armor, as well as upgrade your tank on its power, HP, and armor. The weapon upgrades even branch into having separate models that multiple units or a single one can have. You can also buy special parts for your tank to further boost its stats by arranging them in block segments. From there, there's also the Castlefront Street, where you'll find Miss Ellet, who runs a newspaper and radio station, who often writes her own articles on things that happen with you during the game as a way of telling the people of the city on what's really going on. Because, you know, government censorship and all that, while also selling you articles and interviews that lead into side stories for certain main characters. Said missions also give some of the main characters their unique potential skills. After that, there's the War Cemetery, where you meet an aged gentleman will sometimes offer you a war order that Welkin can use in battle. It's apparently random what skills you can get and when, just like with the character units who show up over time. But some do work well, so it shouldn't be much of a waste of experience to check them out. Otherwise, the last option for HQ is the Audience Hall, where after saving the Gallian princess, Cordelia, she will reward you for your accomplishments, which are essentially in-game achievements. She will sometimes even give you weapon upgrades that are sometimes stronger than the standard variants you normally get. There's a few other tabs worth mentioning, like despite most of the character units not having much backstory or character interaction, like in most Fire Emblem games would have, they still get background information added over time through the Personnel tab, which documents the characters, weapons, etc. And of course you have skirmish maps that you can do anytime to increase your experience points and money. And of course the challenge maps, which are hard, but if you do well, you can get a lot of money and experience early on to help with the story more. But really, the gameplay is definitely up above a lot of the standard strategy games at the time. Each chapter introduces a new element that amps up the gameplay and gets you to rethink your strategy. Things like cover, destructible environments, reinforcements, watchtowers, night vision, etc. In addition, you still have orders that you and certain enemy commanders have, which can apply to either a single unit or everybody, by using up command points to boost a certain stat, heal, or inflict damage to the enemy. This can drastically change up how a unit will approach their surroundings, hence why I mentioned that it's possible to clear maps with less units and as fast as possible. Your score is based on several factors, such as how quick you clear it and how many important units you kill who have a medal near their name. Just as you and other main characters have them, killing units with these medals reduces the amount of actions they can make, so you should always prioritize them as much as possible. There can also be other types of hazards, like mortar fire, that can affect large areas of the map. And while you can disarm the tank mines, you can't stop the little mines that a standard unit can trigger, so just have your lancers touch them. At any rate, the later maps get more complex over time and do provide variety in what you actually fight. Like, you even fight Federation soldiers during one mission where they try to take the princess hostage. And the things you face in later missions just get bigger over time. And just to really shake things up, one of the tank sub-weapons you receive is a smokescreen made by Isara. This really can change the way you approach even earlier maps once you change the game because enemy units can't see within the cloud. All that can be said about the gameplay is that it does the job of getting you to really think about your actions while also testing your reflexes and placement of units, while also anticipating where the enemy may go in accordance to those actions. Plus, the things you do for missions are so well thought out that it makes what you do worth it. Obviously, you may feel compelled to scum save or reset constantly, but that's natural for those wanting to preserve everyone and not let a single person die. It might not have fleshed out characters for everyone like in Fire Emblem games, but it makes up for it with a better traditional story and main cast with awesome third-person shooter strategy gameplay. Speaking of characters, let's talk more about them. The main cast of Squad 7, including Welkin, Alicia, and Isara, also include 3 other notable characters. Rosie being a corporal shock trooper, who has it out for Isara because she is from the Darkson race, who were said to be responsible for a calamity that wrecked the country, and some were apparently responsible for the death of her family.
You really have to ask, Lieutenant? It's either her or me, pal. Who let her in anyway? You really think I'm gonna work with a dark hair? She'll blow us all up. Besides, I can't stand the stink of her!
Oh yes, I've heard everything you have to say. But I'm still a human being, the same as you. Besides, no evidence exists to substantiate what you call the Darkson calamity. It's a myth.
Excuse me? So what, you're calling me stupid?
The dynamic between these two is, despite racial tensions, Rosie starts to see past her hatred and eventually becomes more aware of the reality that there's still people who suffer just as much as her.
She was just a kid. Somebody tell me who did this. I'll tear their stinking heads off!
The game has her learn that the past actions of others shouldn't cloud her judgment of those who had nothing to do with them, and without spoiling the later parts of the game, I will at least say that her friendship with Isara gets really tear-jerking later on, and you can see how sincere her friendship becomes, and how much she grows as a person. Largo isn't quite as developed as Rosie during the main story, but he does act as the hardy old man who, despite being tough on Welkin at first, sees him as that reliable leader he makes him out to be. Plus, occasionally acting as the third wheel in Rosie and Isara's ever-growing friendship by trying to keep them from arguing on occasion. If anything, he's most remembered for his love of veggies, how he wants to make a farm that grows the best kind, and his personal skill being vegetables! Then there's Zaka, who like Isara is a Darkson, who acts as a secondary tank unit who comes with his own upgrades and tank parts. He's actually pretty chill, and not just because he's voiced by Steve Blum, and is also a factor in Rosie's character development. In one chapter, you're told to go and liberate a mining camp that have Imperials using Darkson workers for slave labor. Zaka acts as a leader to the Darkson there, so he gets speaking privileges in negotiating with one of the Imperial leaders. Of course, he's been waiting for Gallia to show up to help take them down, and while telling us what to do, he also talks to Rosie regarding her racism.
Music can pick you up or make you cry. Anthems can drive a whole country to war. That's the great thing about music. Variety. Every song is different, but it's all good.
Yeah, I guess so.
If you appreciate diversity in music, why hate all the Darksons?
What?
There's plenty of races in the world. Each has its traits, but people are all unique. Just like with music. They've all got their good points. Well, I think so anyway.
And despite becoming your second tank unit, his words regarding war and what it means to his people is certainly deep.
Even if our traditions lead us to death at the hands of others, we don't respond with violence. When we die for peace. That is how the Darkson live their lives.
Now those lives are gone. Forever.
But why?
I could hate them, maybe even kill them, but that wouldn't bring those people back. All I can really do is try to survive and help the ones who are still here.
Essentially, fighting for revenge won't bring people back. It's better to help those still alive however you can. If that's the reason to fight, it at least shows your reasons are just and hope that the cycle of hate will end. It's also more apparent that even the Imperials have those just fighting to help someone, be it their families and the like. At first, the game paints them as your typical enemy force that treats you like scum.
Take a good look at that shawl. She's a Darkson.
And that explains it. I thought this place stunk. Now I know it does. So, we got ourselves a fat one and a stinky one.
But in a later mission, in which Welkin and Alicia get separated from the squad, they encounter an Imperial soldier who was injured from mortar fire and is on the brink of death. They tend to him, and all the while, this happens.
Oh, God, Mother! Mother?
It's okay. Don't be afraid. Mother's right here. Everything's fine. See?
Yes. It's...
Man, he was lying there asking me for help, but all I could do was watch him die.
That's not true. You helped him in a way only you could. The look on his face when he passed on wasn't one of pain.
I'd always just thought of the Imperials as monsters out to kill Gallians. But they're just as human as we are, huh? With families of their own to fight for.
It's then enforced with this unnamed officer, and acknowledges your actions and shares his own reasons for fighting.
And I have another sort of family as well. I have the soldiers of my squad.
I see. I have a wife and daughter back at home. I feel the same as you. My men are like a second family to me. Thank you. Thank you for honoring Fritz as you did.
While this doesn't necessarily reflect reality, you do at least understand that some people have their own reasons to fight, and it's not going to be the same as everyone else. Some either had no choice, or feel like it's the only way to save everyone, even if they don't recall why they all started fighting to begin with. They want the war to end as quick as possible, even if they don't know the intentions of their leaders. Speaking of which, the main antagonists of this game are only a small fraction of the entire Imperial Alliance, but one of them is a prince named Maximilian, who while sent to invade Gallia, intends to conquer Europa, and possibly more given his past. He relies on the other members of the Drei Stern, who comprise of Gregor, the obvious Nazi allegory of the game, Jaeger, who hails from another kingdom, who is fighting to liberate his homeland after serving his time with the Alliance, and Silveria, a close accomplice to Maximilian, who is also said to be a descendant of the legendary race, the Valkyria. And what is she capable of?
Cobalt flames of the Valkyria. Smite our foes! All forces, there stands Gallia! Claim her!
Ready? Fire!
The Valkyria, in general, are often the major antagonistic force in these games. Often women, though, whose powers seem to make them near invincible, which is why Maximilian is interested in their history and how he can incorporate them in the war. It also seems to be connected to Alicia in some way, as in one of the ruins, a doorway that could only be opened by a Valkyria opens up for her. What could that mean? Well, before I go into her and Welkin, the last thing I'll note of Maximilian and Silveria is that we do get insight into their motivations for fighting and how complex the relations in this war truly go. The war themes present are based off real life, just in a fantasy setting, but they can still ring home when talking about certain aspects. It does respect the horrors that come from war while still being marketed toward the teen demographic. I say this knowing the large amount of bodies flying around like lifeless puppets. Now going back to Welkin and Alicia, these two get the most development out of all the main characters. Welkin had gone to study nature instead of following in his father's footsteps, and applies his knowledge of it to combat and even people. He tends to compare nature to people a lot, and often he can be obsessive about it, much to a fault. He is very humble, and he does his best to help his squad as like a father would. With Alicia, she used to work in a bakery and uses her skills to bake bread for Welkin to eat. Together, they would learn more about each other and their relationship would grow over time. Again, I won't spoil anything else regarding a certain mission later in the game, but yes, it does lead into romance, and it's one that I think works well given the amount of time they spend together. Really, I could go on with the story as a whole and the interesting twists that occur, but that's something you would really need to see for yourself. The story is set to where you can easily expand upon it, yet this could easily be a standalone entry. It opens up a whole world of possibilities as you wonder what else happens while in this small nation battle out a large threat and where it takes you to. People are often drawn in by the war theme that games like Call of Duty or Battlefield have, but this one steps away from traditional FPSs in favor of actually telling a compelling story. It's different enough from even JRPGs that even those who don't typically like anime or Japanese games would feel the need to want to play this one. They can find comfort in both story and gameplay being perfectly balanced and rewarding, which is what many want in games like this. I'd argue it's a great starting point for anyone wanting to play strategy games in general, because of how accessible it can be with its progression. Now, in the way of reception and how it led to other games, this is where the series gets a bit rocky in the way of quality. And what, though, varies. Despite the highly positive reviews it got, sales in America, compared to the standard Japanese release units sold for their games, were only about 33,000 sold in November. It did gain a huge increase the following year after getting a price cut, plus there was an anime for this game released at around the same time to help it. But still, in terms of original release, the creators noted the desire for a sequel, but they ended up releasing it on the PSP because of the popularity of the portable systems in Japan. Japan tends to favor games with accessibility on the go given their own living style compared to our own, who tend to favor home gaming instead of handheld. Still, the second game didn't quite reach the same level of charm as the original due to the limited graphics, so the Canvas engine isn't at its fullest. It did at least succeed in being a worthy sequel, as far as Japan is concerned, but I guess international sales weren't high enough to warrant a localization of the third game, also on the PSP. In 2012, there was a mobile/browser card game called Valkyria Chronicles Duel, which lasted until 2015. And then in 2017, there was that PS4 game called Valkyria Revolution, which takes place in a different country, possibly different universe, where it adopts more of an action RPG style, while it seems to ditch the Canvas engine, which was all met with mixed reception due to how the story and gameplay were handled. For a return to consoles, this was not exactly what fans wanted. However, on November 2017, it was announced that a fourth Valkyria Chronicles game would be released in 2018. Not just for the PS4, but on Xbox One, PC, and even the Nintendo Switch. The game is currently out in Japan, but it's recently slated for a worldwide release in September of this year, with so far about the same reception as the earlier entries. It even sees the return of the graphic stylings that the first game had when using the Canvas engine, making it a solid return to form while seeing what else happened during the Second Europa War that the first game featured. That, of course, I can't wait to play, and depending on things, I may even consider doing that for the January game review. But otherwise, Valkyria Chronicles itself will always remain a classic as far as strategy games go. As I mentioned, it's receiving a Switch release, but in commemoration of the fourth game's release to the system. So if you haven't played the remastered version at least, maybe you could give it a go on the Switch, whenever that comes out. It's that good of a game. One of the best I've played, with amazing visuals, a great cast, and a really stellar storyline. I highly recommend it to all who enjoy the thrill of strategy games. Next time, it's the bonus objective video. We actually had a bit of a tiebreaker between two films, so stay tuned to see which one won.